The water was warm. That was the first thing worth noting about the town of Kendrick. And for a while, it was the only thing. The stranger had been riding for 6 days straight across flat, dry nothing. The kind of terrain that bleached the color out of everything, including a man's patience. And when he saw the barber's sign advertising hot baths for 2 bits, he didn't need to think about it. He tied Scout at the rail, paid the barber, and sat down in the big wooden barrel on the boardwalk with his hat still on and his gun belt hung on the chair beside him, and let the heat pull 6 days of dust and distance out of his bones. Scout stood at the rail and watched the street the way the horse always watched streets, turning his head slowly from one end to the other, cataloging every door and window and alley. The stranger let him work. One of them was always working. The town was quiet in the wrong way. Not empty quiet. Held breath quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when everyone in a place has learned the same lesson at the same time. And the lesson was, keep your head down. The barber had taken his 2 bits without making eye contact. The woman sweeping the boardwalk across the street had looked at the stranger once, and then looked away and swept faster, like being seen near a newcomer was dangerous. A boy had been sitting on a barrel outside the feed store, and when the stranger rode in, someone had pulled the boy inside by his collar without a word. He noticed all of it. He always noticed. But the water was warm, and 6 days was 6 days, and for the first 20 minutes he just sat there with the steam rising around his hat, and his eyes half closed, and his hand close enough to the chair that if the gun belt needed to move, it would move. That's when they came. 4 of them. Walking up the middle of the street from the south end with the sun behind them, they walked shoulder to shoulder, spread wide, the way men walk when they want a street to know it belongs to them. The stranger heard their boots before he opened his eyes. 4 sets of spurs, new ones by the sound, the kind men bought when they wanted people to hear them coming. He opened his eyes. They were standing about 8 feet from the barrel, looking at him the way men look at something they find amusing. The one in front was lean and tall, with a scar that ran from his left ear to his chin, the kind of scar that a man either got in a knife fight or gave himself to look like he had. The other 3 were the usual, hired weight, big arms, small eyes, gun belts that matched, which meant someone was paying for them. Well now, the one with the scar said. He had a voice like gravel dragged across tin. What do we have here? The stranger didn't move. The water was still warm. His hat was low over his eyes. His right arm was draped over the edge of the barrel, about 14 inches from the gun belt on the chair. He said nothing. You're in Mr. Denton's tub, the scarred man said. Barber charged me 2 bits for it. The barber doesn't own the tub. Mr. Denton owns the tub. Mr. Denton owns the barber. Mr. Denton owns the water that filled it. And Mr. Denton doesn't like strangers sitting in his town using his water without permission. The stranger looked at the 4 men, one at a time, the way a man reads a hand of cards. The scarred man was the mouth. The 2 on the left were muscle, nothing more. The one on the right was different. Younger, maybe 22. His hand wasn't near his gun. It was in his pocket. His weight was on his back foot. He didn't want to be here. I'll pay for the water, the stranger said. You'll do more than that. You'll get out of that tub, get on your horse, and ride north. Right now. Wet or dry makes no difference to us. The stranger looked at the steam rising from the water. Then he looked at the scarred man. I'm going to finish my bath. The scarred man smiled. He looked at the other 3. They smiled too, except the young one, who looked at the ground. Mister, there are 4 of us, and you are sitting naked in a barrel. I don't think you understand your situation. I understand it fine. 4 men with guns standing over a man in a bathtub. That's not a situation. That's a choice. And you haven't made yours yet. The smile dropped. Something about the way the stranger said it, the complete absence of hurry or fear, the way his eyes hadn't moved from the scarred man's face, the way his breathing hadn't changed. The scarred man looked at the gun belt on the chair, then looked at the stranger's arm draped over the edge of the barrel, then did the math on 14 inches. We'll be back, the scarred man said, and when we come back, Mr. Denton's coming with us, and Mr. Denton doesn't ask twice. They turned and walked south. The young one looked back once. The stranger noted it. He sat in the water for another 5 minutes, not because he needed to, because rushing was a language, and he didn't speak it. Then he stood up, dried off with the towel the barber had left on the railing, dressed, buckled the gun belt, and settled the poncho over his shoulders. The water dripped off his hair and down the back of his neck, and he didn't wipe it. He untied Scout and walked the horse down the street, reading the town the way he read every town, by what was missing. No school. There had been one. The building was still there at the east end of the street, but the windows were boarded and the bell was gone from the steeple. A church with its doors open but nobody inside. A general store with half-empty shelves visible through the glass. A saloon called the Dusty Rose that was the only building on the street with fresh paint, because saloons were always the last thing to die in a town that was dying. He pushed through the saloon doors. A barkeep behind the counter, thin, nervous, polishing a glass he'd already polished. Two old men at a corner table nursing drinks that had gone warm. A woman sitting alone near the window with a ledger open in front of her and a pencil behind her ear. He sat at the bar and ordered whiskey. The barkeep poured it and stepped back like the bottle might explode. "Who's Denton?" the stranger asked. The barkeep's hand tightened on the glass. "Mister, please. 4 of his men just told me I was sitting in his water. I'd like to know whose water I'm not allowed to sit in." The woman by the window looked up. She studied the stranger for a moment, then closed her ledger and walked to the bar and sat down 2 stools away. She was maybe 40, hard to tell, with the kind of face that had been pretty before something wore it down. Her hands were stained with ink. Bookkeeper's hands. "Lyle Denton," she said. "Came here about 2 years ago. Bought the livery first, then the feed store, then the well rights, then everything else. Anyone who wouldn't sell got a visit from Mr. Pruitt." Pruitt. His lawyer. Little man, quiet. Carries a leather case full of documents that say whatever Mr. Denton needs them to say. Back taxes, water liens, survey disputes. All of it manufactured. All of it filed with the county clerk in Wheeler, who Mr. Denton pays $400 a year to look the other way. "How do you know the amount?" She almost smiled. "Because I used to be Mr. Denton's bookkeeper, before I quit, before I realized what the numbers I was entering actually meant." The stranger set his glass down. "You kept copies." "I kept everything. Every ledger entry, every payment to the clerk, every property transfer that didn't match the original deeds. I kept it because my mother taught me that numbers don't lie, and the day might come when someone needs to see the truth." She looked at him. "My name is Ruth Calloway. My mother owned the boarding house. Mr. Denton owns it now. My mother died in the room she used to rent to travelers. She died in a room she used to own, and she paid rent on it until the day they buried her." The stranger was quiet for a long time. The barkeep had stopped pretending to polish and was just standing there listening. "How many families?" 11, in 2 years. Some sold for pennies, some were driven out. 2 of them had accidents on the road that weren't accidents." She paused. "The Marshfield family had a ranch east of town, 300 acres, cattle, water. Frank Marshfield told Denton he'd never sell. 2 weeks later, Frank's barn burned with 40 head inside. A month after that, Frank signed over everything. I saw the transfer document. Frank's hand was shaking so bad the signature looked like it was written during an earthquake." "Where's Frank now?" "Gone. Took his family to Kansas. Couldn't look at the land anymore." "And the Marshfield deed? The real one?" "Ruth Calloway keeps very good records," the barkeep said quietly. It was the first useful thing he'd said. Ruth looked at the stranger. "I have the copies of the original deeds for 6 of the 11 families. I have the ledger entries showing what Denton paid versus what the land was worth. I have the payments to the county clerk documented by date and amount. And I have something else." "What?" "Letters. From the families who left. They wrote to me because I was the only one in town who ever told them I was sorry. They wrote down what happened to them, what Denton's men did, what Pruitt said, what the county clerk told them when they tried to fight. 8 letters. 8 families telling the same story in different handwriting." The stranger finished his whiskey. "Where do you keep all this?" "In the one place Denton would never look, the old schoolhouse, behind the chalkboard. He boarded it up a year ago and never went back. Men like Denton don't think about schools. There were rules out there, not the kind Denton's lawyer carried in his leather case. Older rules, the kind that existed before courts and clerks and county offices. A man's land was his land. You didn't take it with paper that you made up in a back room. A woman's home was her home. You didn't charge her rent to die in the room she'd built with her own hands. The code, the unwritten code. It governed everything on the frontier before men like Denton showed up to replace it with forgeries. How land was really held, how debts were really settled, how water rights actually worked. What happened to men who broke rules that didn't need to be written down because every honest man already carried them? The full code, every rule, every consequence. It's called the Code of the West. It's in the pinned comment. He went to the schoolhouse that night. The boards came off easy. Inside, the desks were still in rows, covered in dust. Small chairs pushed in like the children might come back. Ruth's hiding place was behind the chalkboard, a canvas bag hanging on a nail. Inside were the ledgers, the letters, and copies of 6 original deeds. He sat at the teacher's desk and read everything by lantern light while Scout stood outside the door like a sentry. The pattern was identical to every town like this he'd ever seen. Buy the clerk, forge the surveys, file the paper, send the lawyer. When the lawyer doesn't work, send the men. When the men don't work, send the fire. He cross-referenced Ruth's ledger entries with the letters from the families, and the timeline was clean. 11 families over 2 years, the same sequence every time. And Denton's payments to the county clerk, documented in Ruth's careful handwriting, tied every piece together. He sent 3 telegrams from the relay station 8 miles west before dawn. Federal Land Commission, U.S. Marshal's Office, and one to the territorial judge in Wheeler, the one Ruth said Denton hadn't managed to buy yet. Each telegram contained names, dates, dollar amounts, and property descriptions. He was back by sunrise. Ruth was waiting outside the saloon with 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one without a word. They stood on the boardwalk and watched the town wake up. "The man with the scar," the stranger said. "What's his name?" "Garrett. He's been with Denton from the start. He's the one who visits the families after Pruitt files the paper. He's the one who visited Frank Marshfield the night the barn burned. The young one. Hangs back, hand in his pocket." Ruth looked at him. "You don't miss much. That's Billy Pruitt, the lawyer's son. He's been riding with Garrett for about 3 months. He doesn't have the stomach for it. You can see it in his face. That's the one I start with. He found Billy Pruitt at the livery brushing a horse that didn't need brushing." The kid looked up and his hand went to his pocket again, the nervous habit of a man who kept something there that wasn't a gun. A letter, the stranger guessed, or a photograph. "Your father files forged documents for a living," the stranger said. No preamble, no introduction. "The county clerk's name is in a federal telegram as of this morning. Every property transfer your father's signature is on is about to be reviewed by a territorial judge. Every man still standing next to Denton when the marshals arrive goes down with him. That includes you. And that includes your father." Billy's face went white. "My father said the papers were real. Your father knows they're not, and so do you. That's why your hand is never near your gun. That's why you looked back at me yesterday when the other 3 didn't." The kid stared at the ground. The stranger let him think. Thinking was what separated the ones who could be reached from the ones who couldn't. "What do you want?" Billy asked. "I want you to go to your father and tell him what I just told you. And I want you to ask him one question. Does he want to be the lawyer who cooperated, or the lawyer who went down with the man who paid him?" Billy left the livery at a walk. Within an hour, Pruitt Sr. was at the saloon asking to see the stranger. The lawyer was a small man with clean hands and careful eyes, and a leather case that he set on the bar like it was a dead animal he was finally putting down. "I'll open every file," Pruitt said. "Every one." "I know you will." 11 property files. 11 forgeries. The stranger laid them on the bar beside Ruth's ledger entries and the letters from the families, and when you put them all together, the case wasn't just strong, it was a wall. Garrett and 3 men came looking for the stranger at noon. They found him sitting on the boardwalk outside the barber shop in the same spot where the barrel had been. Dry this time. Dressed. The poncho draped over his shoulders and the gun belt visible underneath. Garrett stopped in the street. "Mr. Denton wants to see you." "I'll bet he does." The stranger didn't stand up. "But first you should know a few things. Your lawyer just opened every cabinet. The county clerk in Wheeler is named in a federal telegram. 6 of your men left this morning, and Billy Pruitt told me about the Marshfield barn." Garrett's scar went white. The 3 men behind him looked at each other. The arithmetic was happening. You could see it moving across their faces like weather. "You've got a choice," the stranger said. "Same one everyone gets. Walk away now and you're a man who used to work for Denton. Stay and you're an accessory to 11 counts of land fraud, 2 arsons, and whatever happened to the men who had accidents on the road. The federal marshals won't ask which one you are. They'll just count who's still standing here." One of the 3 men behind Garrett turned and walked away. Then another. The third looked at Garrett, waiting to see what the scar would do. Garrett stood very still. His hand was near his gun, but his eyes were doing the math, and the math was wrong, and he knew it. "You burned Frank Marshfield's barn," the stranger said quietly. 40 head of cattle, a man's whole life. You did that for wages. Ask yourself if the wages are worth what's coming." Garrett's hand moved away from his gun. He took a step back, then another. Then he turned and walked south, and the 3rd man followed him, and the stranger watched them go, and knew from the way Garrett walked, stiff, fast, leaning forward, that he was going to the livery, and then he was going to ride, and he was never coming back to Kendrick. Denton came alone. That told the stranger everything he needed to know. A man who comes alone to a fight he used to bring 15 men to is a man who already knows it's over. Lyle Denton was not what people expected. He was short, soft around the middle, wearing spectacles and a vest with a watch chain. He looked like a man who sold insurance or taught arithmetic. His hands were smooth. He'd never built anything with them. He'd only signed papers that took what other people built. He stopped in the middle of the street and looked at the stranger sitting on the boardwalk. "You've cost me everything." "No, you never had it. You had paper that said you did. There's a difference. I paid for this town. You paid a clerk to lie. You paid a lawyer to forge. You paid men to burn and threaten and put people on the road who'd lived here their whole lives. That's not paying for a town. That's stealing one. Who are you?" "Nobody. Just a man who needed a bath and didn't like being told whose water it was." Denton looked at the buildings on either side of the street. His buildings. Or they had been, for a while, on paper, in a clerk's office that was about to be opened by a federal marshal. He looked at them the way a man looks at something he's already lost. "The territorial judge has your name," the stranger said. "The marshal's office has your name. The county clerk's payments are documented by date and amount. Your lawyer opened his files this morning. Your men are gone, every one of them. You can stand here and wait for the marshals, or you can get on a horse and ride. But either way, 11 families are getting their land back." Denton took off his spectacles and cleaned them with a handkerchief. His hands were shaking. He put them back on and looked at the stranger one more time, and then turned and walked to the livery. 5 minutes later, he rode south on a horse that was too big for him, sitting the saddle the way men sit who learned to ride late in life and never got comfortable with it. The stranger watched him go and felt nothing in particular. Men like Denton were furniture. They occupied space until someone moved them. The town came out. Ruth Calloway walked into the middle of the street and stood there with her ledger under her arm and looked south where Denton had ridden, and then looked north where the road went to Wheeler and the judge and the future. The barkeep came out and stood on the boardwalk, blinking in the light. An old woman opened the door of the boarding house, Ruth's mother's boarding house, and stood in the doorway, holding the frame like she was remembering what it felt like to own a door. Billy Pruitt came out of the livery, leading his horse. He stopped near the stranger. "Where should I go?" "Anywhere that isn't here. Start over. Use your real name. Don't carry your father's case." The kid nodded and rode east. The stranger watched him go and gave him even odds. Ruth walked up to the stranger. "I'll write to the families, all 11. Some of them might come back. Some of them will. Will you be here when they do?" "No." "I didn't think so." She looked at him. "You know, you could have just gotten out of the tub when they told you to." "I could have. Water was warm, though." She almost smiled. It was the closest thing to a smile he'd seen in Kendrick. He walked to the rail where Scout was waiting. The horse had been watching the street the whole time, ears tracking every movement. And when the stranger put his hand on the saddle, Scout turned north without being told. That easy trot that covered miles without announcing them. Ruth stood in the street with her ledger and watched him go. The old woman was still standing in the doorway of the boarding house. The barkeep had gone back inside and was pouring drinks, but this time the glasses were clean. Somewhere in the old schoolhouse, behind a chalkboard in a room full of small, dusty desks, there was a nail where a canvas bag used to hang. The bag was gone now. The evidence was with the stranger, heading toward a judge who hadn't been bought. But the desks were still there, and Ruth was already talking about taking the boards off the windows. Some towns get taken so quietly that nobody outside ever hears about it. And some towns get taken back the same way. No gunfire, no showdown, just a man in a bathtub who refused to get out when he was told to, and a woman with ink on her hands who kept the numbers because her mother taught her that numbers don't lie. "I'll see you on the road," and the code the stranger carries, the one Ruth Calloway's mother lived by, the one that said your home is your home, and nobody takes it with paper they made up in a back room, the one that Frank Marshfield carried all the way to Kansas, because a man doesn't stop carrying it just because someone burned his barn. That's in the pinned comment.